foreign policy expert and author of the upcoming book, Iran, an Imperialist Republic and U.S. Policy, Dr. Walid Phares. Walid, welcome back to the program.
Thank you for having me. Care about their own power, number one. They care about cash, number two. And they care about balancing with the United States. The problem, though, is that a couple of years ago, we advised the Biden administration to pay attention to the Arab coalition. Don't put pressure on the UAE, on the Abraham Accords, on the Saudis, on the Egyptians. That's why now the president of Egypt is here, because they understood that if they put a lot of pressure on their allies, including on Israel, it's going to backfire. The Saudis and the UAE are in Moscow, are in China. They're not anti-American, but they're telling us, you're doing your own interest. You went to Iran to do the Iran deal. We are going to China to do our own deal as well. So it all goes back to what we have tried to do. Remember, during the Trump administration, the Saudis, the Arabs, Israel were all with Trump, and then were coordinating their actions in the Middle East and got to the Riyadh meeting.
Played the Middle East, and your advice in the Trump administration, the government had readjusted and were playing the entire Middle East against Iran. And this arms dealer that we had, they traded those parties.
Unbelievable.
Where did they do it? Saudi Arabia.
Yes, that's the new role of the Saudis. They're trying to be the moderates.
Saudi Arabia.
Yes,
and
indeed.
the Saudis are playing this up. The American, you didn't hear anything from the Biden administration on this. They're trying to downplay it because the Saudis told him to get lost when he wanted oil.
Well, they're going to hear from the House in the next months. There will be a lot of panels to discuss what have we done in 2021. We have withdrawn from Afghanistan. And that was a disaster because we empowered the Taliban, we empowered the jihadists. We rushed immediately to revive the Iran deal, which basically was criticized by the Israelis, by the Iranian opposition, and by all our Arab allies. Since we did this, many things have started to change in the Middle East.
No, it's scattered. Let's move on to Iran. According to several reports, over 400 protesters have been killed, and about 18,000 arrested or detained since the protests began in Iran this September. Why has this revolt been so resilient, Walid?
Well, so many reasons. My book will explain most of it. But for us, for our public, we could say it is being led by women. Second, it's backed by teenagers, boys and girls. And this is half of Iran. Raymond, half of Iran are people under the age of 20 and 18. The current generation demonstrating in the streets, average age 14 to 17. How can a regime at the end of the day crush what would be the future of Iran, these young people?
Is that why they've been reluctant to put them down? We haven't seen the putting down of protests as they have in the past?
Look, the Iranian regime is smart. They know if there are, there is a bloodshed among youth, this would create an explosion inside Iran. They could take them to the International Tribunal. But what is very important, Iran is not, the regime is not even able to cut down the internet. And people will ask me why. Well, over the past few years, the Iranians themselves built an economy based on 80% on internet. So if they cut the internet for the protesters, they will go down as well.
Yes. Wow. This week, a sister of the Iranian supreme leader, Ali Khamenei, said she has cut ties with her brother, calling him a despotic caliph who is ignoring the voice of Iranians. She also called on security forces to lay down their arms and join the protesters. What do you make of this? Is this the beginning of something? Now, I hesitate to say this because we saw this during the Green Revolution.
Well, we saw we saw it, Raymond, since 1999, the first uprising, which we didn't hear anything about because it was 1999. There was no any internet, Facebook, or Twitter. But we saw a little bit, and you and I discussed it actually years ago in 2009 with the Green Revolution. It was crushed immediately. One of the reasons is that the president then here, President Obama, said, we don't want to meddle.
Correct.
We don't want to meddle. That's a green light to the regime. And we saw a lot of it in 2019. But unfortunately, the U.S. administration, the Trump administration, was busy with what? Defending itself from the attacks coming from the inside politics of the United States. Now it's different. Now the Biden administration will have to position itself because eventually, if we do not help them, they're going to get to change the regime.
So do you believe we're seeing the beginning of a revolution here? Is that what we're seeing? And what tactics can this current regime use to keep these Iranian protests from boiling over and maybe overthrowing the leadership?
Well, first, number one, they are now starting the execution. By tonight, 2 Iranian dissidents or demonstrators have been executed. One this morning, and they're scheduling one for tonight. But beyond that, what the Iranian regime is trying to do is play time. They want a silence from the United States administration, a silence from the European Union, so that they could take all their time to crush them. But they are mistaken, because this youth in Iran has no jobs, has nothing to wait for except do a change in Tehran.
They've been focusing a lot on the Kurdish areas of Iran. Why?
Kurdish area in Iran is pretty big. It has about 7 million people. That's pretty large for the Iranian population. But there are other areas now following Kurdistan who are, for example, the Baluch in eastern Iran, the Azeris in the north. There are Arab-speaking Ahwazis in some other parts of Iran. The Kurds will fight. And the Kurds have a border in Iraq with the other Kurds inside Iraq.
Why, if this administration claims to stand for human rights, hold Iran accountable, and why are they continuing to desire a nuke deal with a country like this?
Well, that's precisely the question. First of all, they are 3 time zones behind. That's the Biden administration. They are doing things that they should have done in September. And the things they should do now, they're not yet doing, which is basically, and number one, as you just said, why are they still negotiating the Iran deal?
Right.
First thing you do, you tell Iran, I'm suspending these negotiations until you respect human rights. They're not doing this. And the reason why, which I also expand on in my book, is that there are a lot of financial interests in the United States and in Europe who wants to go to the Iranian market, who wants to strike deals, not for our national security interests, but because of their financial interests. And that is putting a lot of pressure on the Biden administration. No.
So how do you work with this regime? What should the U.S. government be doing?
Well, first of all, in 2015, we have an example. There is a jurisprudence about what to do and what happens if you actually sign with this regime and send $150 billion, all right? So the idea under the Obama administration, and the gentleman was with the Obama administration, was that this will moderate Iran. Send them money, they'll do business. What did they do with $150 billion? Bought weapons.
That's exactly right.
Ballistic missiles. So that's not the good model for the future. Had the President Obama in 2009 stood with the Iranian revolt at the time, we would have been dealing with a peaceful Iran today.
I imagine you touch on this in your forthcoming book. Iran has been a destabilizing force, not only in the region, around the world. Their influence in Iraq, Lebanon with Hezbollah, Yemen with the Houthis. How likely is it that we see a collapse of this regime, and what replaces the regime should it get overthrown?
In my view, historical view, so I'm not limited by time here, I would say this regime is dead, politically dead, because the youth, that is the future of this regime, is already against them. The question is, how long would it take? How bad it's going to be?
What do? Bring back the Shah? I mean, he's over here in Northern Virginia, right?
Well, yes, he's here in Northern Virginia, and there are resistance oppositions that the Congress is in touch with in Brussels, in France, around the world, even in Albania. But there are also these young, courageous boys and girls inside Iran. This is the future, actually. So now, how will Iran evolve under a post-Islamic republic is a matter that you and I, will be observing for many years to come.
Wow.
My concern is, when will that change occur? Unfortunately, as long as the U.S. administration, this one, is not pushing forward for a change, it's going to take time. And with time comes drama and bloodshed.
Yeah, well, this is good. You could call this chapter Dealing with Dictators.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know why we bend over for the Chinese, who are slaughtering their people, locking them in buildings and burning them alive. We bend over for the Iranians, who are butchering their own people and holding down their aspirations while exporting terror to the entire world. I don't understand this. It just doesn't make basic common sense. Forget international diplomacy or policy. There's no American interest in this, it seems to me. So I don't know why we're pursuing this.
There are financial interests which are not the national security interests of the United States. Remember, when we did a deal with the Taliban, we discovered that there were interests involved in the Muslim Brotherhood, companies, controlled companies. And now we realize that some of these interests are behind this policy of cutting a deal with Iran so that they will make those interests, but not the American people.
Held since August, and the Sisters of Charity have been expelled from the country. Pope Francis has said nothing, sadly, about this situation. Your thoughts?
Well, I think the United States should be more vigorous in condemning these activities. I mean, we have been siding over the past 2 years with every single leftist, radical regime and organization in Latin America. I mean, in Brazil, for example, the crisis between the two sides, we are praising Lula, Lula who has strategic relations with every single radical regime in the Middle East and Asia, and same thing goes for Cuba. And so these radical regimes take a cue from how we are designing our new foreign policy, which is not with the people or with the church, but with these authoritarian leaders.
Before I let you go, tell me about the new book, Iran, an Imperialist Republic and U.S. Policy. I know people can pre-order it now. Why did you write the book? Why now?
I wrote that book in my brain for the last 30 years. I was observing, analyzing. So it's almost an encyclopedia, but very much condensed. It's tough, but it's easy. But the most important matter is that I looked at the Iranian revolts one after the other, and I projected that eventually the big one is coming. It's like the earthquakes. And at the same time, I was very concerned about our policy regarding Iran, because this could harm the Abraham Accord, could harm peace in the region. So I said to myself, I need to enlighten the American public, and I wrote the book. It was projected for 2023, but my publisher, Raymond, said, no, there is a revolt.
Got to go now. Your timing is perfect, Walid Phares. We will leave it there. Iran, an Imperialist Republic and U.S. Policy is available for pre-order now at walidpharesiran.com. And beginning next week, the book is available on Amazon, wherever books are sold. Walid Phares, thank you for being here.